Representative Swalwell. Thank you so much for joining me on Merion West. We are so happy to have you with us. We initially want to talk to you about your book, Endgame. Could you let us know how you came about writing a book, which was specifically on impeachment?
Well, thank you so much, Kevin. I think you probably hear my 1-year-old in the background, and I've got a 3-year-old as well. And I wrote it in part for them in their generation, to chronicle.
I'm sorry, Representative. I'm just interjecting to let you know your Instagram is full of your children, and they are very playful, and you're playing with them all the time. So we are happy that they are joining us as well, because as you said, we're talking about the next generations as well.
That's right.
Please go ahead.
That's right. No, thank you. So I wrote it, as a tribute to the heroes who came forward, like Lieutenant Colonel Vindman and Fiona Hill and Marie Yovanovitch. Also a call to action for what we have to do this coming November. And also, here's my daughter Cricket. And also just for the next generation, so that maybe there's some lessons learned, so this never happens again. So I was privileged to serve on the Judiciary and Intelligence Committee as we did this, and I wanted to make sure that my vantage point was shared with the country. And as I said, I also want to ensure that voters this November recognize that we may not have removed the president through the impeachment process, but at the ballot box, he can be removed. And if we want to see an end to corruption, that's what we're going to have to do.
Thank you so much. Just a follow-up. I read the book. It's very engaging, and you just follow the whole chronicle of what we saw during the impeachment process. But there are some part of you in the book as well. So it's not just about impeachment. It's a story about you as well. Was it intentional? Did you want to keep yourself also as some kind of eye of the beholder in all of the narration that you had in the book?
I was raised by a police officer who moved from California to Iowa to be a police chief. And my earliest memory was my dad losing his job because he was standing up to a corruption network in a small town in Iowa. And he wouldn't bend to the will of some corrupt mayor and council members. And so I saw he was willing to lose his job to do the right thing. And that lesson imparted on me at 5 years old stayed with me my whole life. And so I thought it was an interesting parallel. My dad standing up for what was right, lost his job because of it. And then here we were in 2019 holding the president accountable and seeing people like Hill and Yovanovitch and Vindman willing to lose their job to do what was right. And I was able to play, a part in it and, be guided by that lesson learned from my father.
I wanted to keep this for later, but since it's current news, I want to ask you to that. You have a chapter on the man with the Nixon tattoo. So I wanted to ask you about the commute, the sentence of Roger Stone, and what's your take on this?
Well, there's been two commutations of Roger Stone's sentences, essentially, because if you recall, after he was convicted on 7 counts, some of them for lying to our committee, and some of those counts were questions that I had asked of him in our investigation, the Department of Justice reduced the prosecutor recommendations for sentencing. So his sentence was essentially cut in half at the end of trial, and then now the president, has corruptly intervened. And I say corruptly intervened because Bill Barr was asked at his nomination hearing if he believed a president could use the pardon power to help somebody who would not end up testifying against the president. And he said, no, that would be unlawful. And so Attorney General Barr recognized that. I think it is unlawful to misuse the process that way. And again, I think now it's really on all of us at the ballot box to hold him accountable.
Representative Swalwell, in your book, you detail all the steps of the impeachment. I mean, some people like me, we watched almost from the start when the media started to broadcasting it. We will watch it till the end. It's a great, memory to keep in mind. Why do you think the impeachment wasn't end the way I'm not exactly you, I mean the other side, Democratic Party, I'm not saying wishing for, or at least they're aiming for.
Well, Kevin, I believe the problem was that there were not enough Mitt Romneys on the Republican side. There was actually one senator, Lamar Alexander, as I detailed in the book, who said, "You actually proved your case." He didn't doubt any of the evidence that we put forward, which I guess was heartening in one sense, but really frustrating in the other, in that he was saying, even with such an overwhelming case, he was still willing to look the other way and not remove the president. And so that just showed what we were up against, that even, with a senator admitting that we proved the case, they were so unwilling to stand up against the president. And so now, we could impeach him from here until election day. There's certainly enough crimes that he's committed. But I think there's a recognition now that if the Senate's not willing to act, we have to act on our own at the ballot box.
I'm going to do some, not devil's advocating here, but just trying to open it up a little for the people who are not really in your mindset and way you way think it. As you pointed out, Senator Lamar Alexander said that, it was, guilty, but I think lots of people understood that maybe there's a wrongdoing there, but it's not an impeachable offense. I think, and also with the media, the way that, the president, current president of the United States, Donald J. Trump, is just, criticized. I think most of his, followers or supporters thought that, maybe they just don't like him. That's why they are doing the impeachment. So how can you open it up for those people to understand what you followed was the correct path based on your strategy and your view?
Right. And to that fair question, I would say that if impeaching and removing somebody for abusing their power, putting their personal, financial, political interests above the country is not worthy or not deemed, a appropriate use of that remedy, then I don't think we should have that remedy, because I do believe that when you go back and look at the founders and how they interpreted impeachment and how they deliberated as to whether even to have it in our Constitution, they did believe that if a leader abused, his or her power, that had to be the ultimate remedy. And so, our argument was, if this does not rise to the level of impeachment, then no president should be impeached, and we actually really shouldn't call them a president, because they would look more like a king if they were unaccountable.
Well, no doubt, there are some, unlimited powers that the president holds, and you have to keep it accountable. But don't you think the way that, just maybe prior to election, 2016 election, and after, the way that the president treated by the critics didn't make that much of a sense for the people in the impeachment to see this is a different level that you're talking about, and not just a follow up to, whatever criticism or whatever disliking that you had about the president.
Right, and there's no question that from the day, I think it was June 22nd, 2015, sometime in June 2015, from the moment that Donald Trump descended from, the escalator in Trump Tower and went to the microphone and essentially said that, Mexicans were rapists and murderers and coming to our country to take from all of us. There were very strong feelings about Donald Trump by many Americans. And, certainly I think he has put forward, white nationalist beliefs in his build the wall rhetoric, in the Muslim ban that he put in place in his first 100 days in office. But what he did with Ukraine, and also I believe what he's done with the Russia investigation, goes beyond just not agreeing with someone's, worldview or perspective. It was actually criminal. And so with Ukraine, we have a transcript of him calling a foreign leader and asking that leader to do us a favor, though, to essentially take the $390 million aid that we had given Ukraine and not give it to them unless they were willing to investigate the president's upcoming political opponent. And so, while there was an argument that we should just wait for the 2020 election instead of impeaching the president, we were in a position where we were being asked to sit back and do nothing and let the president try and rig an election and say, well, there's going to be an election, so that'll resolve it. But it doesn't resolve it if he's actually trying to rig a fair election.
That's a fair point. The reason I'm asking is that, as you said at the beginning, I mean, there are ballot boxes and there are ways that you can, put things in order if you think it's not just or not right. Democratic Party had a successful blue wave, so it was called after 2016 election. Don't you think if Democrats keep that route going, would have been a much better outcome than impeaching the president?
And it was the blue wave in the midterm elections that gave us the opportunity to hold the president accountable. And I believe that in part those candidates who won, the 41 who were a part of the blue wave, they were elected because they promised to hold the president accountable. And as you saw, public opinion polls during impeachment, a majority of the country supported impeachment. 2/3 or more supported having witnesses at the Senate trial. And so, but I don't, to be honest with you, and I write about this in the book, those members who were in the most vulnerable seats, who it was going to be very hard for them to make a call on impeachment, they actually never looked at the politics of it. They set that aside. They were willing to lose their job to hold the president accountable. So while I understand, again, there are political consequences for everything we do, to me, if a president puts himself above the law, we are given a remedy. And if we don't use it, Kevin, not only do you let him get away with it, you also tell future presidents that the standard of conduct is now lower. And I was very mindful of that I didn't want to lower the standard of conduct for future presidents.
You're in the House of Representatives. You're somehow adults in the room. You were elected. You have a message. You have access. So for somehow for someone like me, to be manipulated by the media or the political waves that is going. But for you, I think it's more important to have a strategy that's going to work in the best way possible not for you, but for your party or also for the whole country. And I'm still struggling to understand if it was the right course to taking, in achieving what you wanted to do. That's my question.
Yeah. And so not only did I believe the evidence justified impeaching the president, and second, I wanted to make sure that the standard for future presidents was the same and not lowered. What we learned during the impeachment investigation, and I detailed this in the book, was that we actually were able to stop the corrupt scheme that the president was running with Ukraine. So only once we launched an impeachment investigation did Ukraine get the aid. Before we had launched it, the president was still withholding the aid. So if at the very least, all that came of this was Ukraine got the aid that they needed to defend themselves against the Russians, that was worth it. But again, I will not regret anything we've done with the Trump administration. I do believe if I have any regrets at all, 5, 10, 15 years from now, it will only be that I didn't do enough. That there was more we could have done to hold him accountable, and we didn't do enough.
Thank you. Representative Swalwell, let's go back to your book and the memory that you said in the beginning from your father. Your father was a policeman. How you take this movement when someone says defund the police? And I'm sure you have a deep connection with your constituents and you want to serve them well, but at the same time, you're son of a policeman. So how do you make sense of what's going on in the streets, especially in the last couple of weeks, and what you think it's the right thing to do?
And I was raised as the son of a cop, and I'm the brother to 2 police officers, and I've seen the best of police in my household. I've seen the good they can do in our community, but we have also seen as a country, and I've seen as a member of Congress, individual and institutional tragedies. And if they are not addressed, they will persist and get worse. And there's no denying to me, not just based on the scientific evidence, but also the stories that I hear, that African-American persons have a different experience with the police, and they're more likely disproportionately to be unjustly victims of violence by the police. We have to do something. So I'm supporting the George Floyd Act, which makes policing reforms. I'm trying to be straight up and direct with my local law enforcement and have conversations with them about why I support it, but why supporting that is what's ultimately best for their profession, because it will give them not only power but authority, and we want them to have both. You know, the power, of course, is the police car that they have, the badge that they wear, the handcuffs that they have to use sometimes. That's power. That's measurable. Authority is not as easily measured, and authority means that they have trust and respect in the community. And then that's what I really would like to see them have, and that's why I'm supporting these reforms.
I have no doubt that even police itself, welcomes any kind of, reform to help them do the job better. But at the same time, I'm struggling. Do you think defund the police is a correct way to go about it? Or maybe you have, for example, 6-step acts. So when it's not met at 6 or 7, then it's one of those. But jumping to the defund the police, do you think it's a little bit discouraging, not just to the police, but also for the bystanders who are watching this back and forth?
Yeah, to me, defund the police means that you reimagine how you use taxpayer dollars to keep the community safe. That perhaps, it doesn't have to require as much militarization that we've seen in the past by the police. Perhaps it means investing more in community police officers. Maybe it means, taking less and spending less on police and more on healthcare, education, job training. So to me, it does not mean that the police don't answer the 911 call, that they aren't responding to a drunk driver or investigating a homicide. It just means that other priorities that have been neglected because of investments in over-policing will get the attention they deserve, and that ultimately, by reprioritizing healthcare and education and jobs, you would reduce the overall need for more police, because crime would go down. So again, I'm in a unique position because of my family, because I worked as a prosecutor, but also because I'm pretty, I think, connected to Black Lives Matter and the voices there, and want to make sure that they do matter and that we get this right.
No, absolutely. I think you're not only raised in a law enforcement household, but you've been prosecutor as well, so you know exactly what you're talking about. My only question is that when you put your interpretation of defund the police, I mean, it makes sense, because you're bringing some ideas that could be measured and could be seen if it's working or not. But when you call it defund the police, I mean, I don't think defund the police allows anyone to have a different interpretation, because it's very, very straightforward. What does it mean?
I was interested that in the last week there was a poll, I think it was a Gallup poll, that said 77% of Americans interpret defund the police as changing the way that police departments are funded, and do not view it as getting rid of the police. So, I had wondered too, as this debate was, raging on, how it would be interpreted. And so I think, it's really on lawmakers to articulate what does it mean to them. To me, it means policing the police and fixing the police, not getting rid, of the police, but expecting better from them, and doing better with the taxpayer dollars that we have to invest in, to recognize that you can't just police your way out of problems, that you have to invest in people and give them hope.
Representative Swalwell, you participate in presidential election process as well. I think from the tone of your book, we can see that the aspiration is very strongly over there. What's next for you?
Well, I'm excited about what's going to happen over the next 100 days, which is the upcoming election. So many of these issues are on the ballot. My hope is that Democrats win the White House, the Senate, and keep the House, and especially on the issue of gun violence, that come January in a new government, I can be a leader to finally bring, the sensible gun safety laws that our country, really needs. So I'm looking forward to that, but I'm going to do everything I can between now and then to register people to vote and hopefully inspire them to turn out to vote. Because as you hear my daughter who's returned, it is always, always, always about the future.
It is. I'm going to ask last question because we lost couple of minutes or seconds because of the disruption. I wanted to ask you what would be the best approach for um, Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden in the election. Perhaps there are things because you were in the same stage with him, you debated. So what would you think for him to either follow or reconsider while he's running his campaign?
I believe this country is looking for a uniter, a problem solver, somebody who can pick us up out of this dark hole that we've gone into and move us forward. And so, as much as it can be a unity team that recognizes we're going to have to come out of a pandemic, we're going to have to distribute a vaccine, we're going to have to see an economic recovery, and then, oh, by the way, there's these longstanding issues of healthcare and climate and gun violence. And if he can, find a place, I think, for a lot of the never Trumpers that are out there, I think that would go a long way and be well received by the country. If you could, have a unity government, a team of rivals to lead the country through, frankly, this hell that we've endured for the last 4 years.
May I have a just quick follow-up? Thank you. You mentioned never Trumpers or others in the camp who are still undecided, but I think there's a significant part of the country are pro-President Trump, and what would be the best way to approach those and let them know that you're safe or you will taken, you're in good hands? Just because Democrats are taking over, it doesn't mean you're forgotten or you're going to be forgotten. What's the best approach on that?
That's a great question, Kevin. And I'm a big advocate for, the day after Donald Trump is not a day to rub any Donald Trump supporters' noses in the fact that he's not president, because we will need to heal as a country. But I also believe if we want to try and appeal to any of them between now and Election Day, part of the appeal for Trump voters was that he was going to come in and drain what he called the swamp. And if you look at what's happened in just the last couple days, the commuting of the sentence of Roger Stone, trying to dismiss the case against Michael Flynn, he's turned out to be exactly the type of politician he said that he was running against. And I hope that connects with people because they will find that he's not drained the swamp. He's actually flooded the swamp. And it turns out that the people that he was going after, who he called, creatures of Washington, you may not have liked that they had hung around Washington for a while, but they also have turned out to be a lot better at governing than Donald Trump. So I hope that people take a hard look at what he promised and what he's actually done. But Joe Biden, I believe, the day after Trump, will seek, his instinct will be to try and unite the country, not to, divide us further.
Thank you so much, President Swalwell. As a journalist, I'm a huge fan because you don't shy away about any conversation, and you will talk to the Fox News, to MSNBC, to anyone, and it's amazing. And thank you so much for keeping in touch with us. And that was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Be safe. All right.